largely being done behind closed doors. In fact, some Republicans say they don't even know what's in the bill. Meantime, we're entering day 9 today, would be day 9 without a White House press briefing. Why? Why isn't there more transparency? Let's discuss with an informal advisor to President Trump, Anthony Scaramucci. Good to have you on, as always.
Hey, great seeing you, Chris.
Day 9, this odd thing where Spicer will talk, but it's got to be off camera. Why? Well, why these kinds of games with transparency?
You're putting me in a tough spot because I'm not in the meetings, and so I don't necessarily know the exact reasons, but it appears from the outside, at least for right now, is that they're going to redesign the communication strategy, and they'll probably, maybe Sean will go to another role inside the White House, or they'll put somebody else behind the podium.
Do you think that's likely that they'll move him?
I don't know. I mean, I've read some of the press speculation. Some of the people that I've talked to inside the White House are saying that they're exploring a couple of different ideas. I mean, this is one of the things that I do like about the president. You know, he's an entrepreneur, and he'll experiment and do different things. I think he's very loyal to Sean. I think Sean is a very hardworking guy. He's got great communication experience, and he may be the communications director, or maybe even an assistant to, you know, Reince Priebus or something like that. Hard to really know from the outside, to be candid. But what I do like is that they're going to try to experiment, and I think maybe that's why they're off camera for a short period of time.
All right, so we'll see which way it goes. And with the president, in terms of the transparency there, that's the gift of Twitter, right? You know what's on the president's mind, often what's in his heart. The White House finally owned that, of course, these are official statements from the President of the United States. Doesn't matter what account they're coming from. He has not said to the UK, open, you know, I don't know what's happened privately, but publicly, condolences for this most recent attack. The speculation is, well, maybe it's because it involves Muslims. Maybe it's because he's got a problem with the mayor there. Why do you think he hasn't said anything, even just offering condolences?
Well, listen, he's an emotional guy. You saw the condolences that he offered yesterday as related to the North Korean situation. Again, I wouldn't know exactly why he's doing that. I think some of the speculation in the press is that he sore at the London mayor. That's not the president's style. That's not his mojo. And so my guess is that he probably will very shortly offer condolences if he hasn't done it publicly right now. And again, maybe he has done it privately, Chris.
In the past, he's done it very quickly.
But here's the point I think you're trying to make, is that could it be because of the way that attack was versus other attacks?
Well, when something's outside the norm of how he usually behaves after an attack, you have to ask, why is it different?
Yeah, but, you know, I mean, here's the biggest problem with the whole system, in my opinion. I mean, not only are you inside a bubble, but then you have all of us examining you inside the bubble. You're in that little fishbowl, and so it could be just that for whatever reason he didn't do it. Now it could have.
But he's in no bubble. He's probably watching right now, and he's going to comment on your tie and your hairstyle. He's watching.
Well, he likes my tie and my hairstyle, but he doesn't like your tie.
He doesn't like anything about me. I understand.
No,
I understand.
No, maybe your hairline. That's about it.
I don't like my hairline.
Probably very little.
Don't distract me, Scaramucci.
Probably very little about it that he likes, actually. But that's
why is it different though this time? Why do you think?
I don't know. I don't know the answer, but here's what I do know about him. Okay, number one, what he said about the North Koreans, I think they should take that seriously. You know, we're going to.
What did he say though?
Oh, he said that we're tough enough to hear. There's a brutal.
He said we'll
regime.
handle it.
We'll handle it. Yeah.
What does that mean? He said
well, if you remember, there's
might be a potential homicide of an American.
100-day period after he met with President Xi. He's asked for the help from the Chinese government. He has moved things around militarily to send a signal that he's going to handle the North Korean situation with or without the help of China. My guess is that China is going to take this seriously and work in concert with the president to help reduce the tension.
We haven't seen anything out of China. Now, fair point. So the Trump White House got Otto Warmbier home. That deserves credit.
Also, the Egyptian prisoner. I can't remember.
No, absolutely. But I'm saying in this case, with Otto Warmbier, they got him home. The Obama administration could not do it. That warrants kudos. However, if this is judged a homicide, which means this young man's death came about because of human action, that's on North Korea. And the question will be, well, if that doesn't demand a muscular response, what does? And I'm only putting it in those terms, not because that's the right thing to do, but it's because what the president said he would do.
And he said it yesterday. He's very, look, Again, you can like the president or dislike him. I happen to love the guy, and let me tell you, when he says something like that, he certainly means it, and the world should wake up and pay attention to what he's saying, because at some point, the American government and the president have to respond to people like the North Koreans. You know, if you've got concentration camps in North Korea, which you and I both know about, and this has been allowed to persist for 60 or 70 years, at some point, moral people have to look at that in concert with the global community and eradicate it. And so what I love about the president, he means what he says. He's not really a politician. Yes, he's 2 years into his political career, but he's really an American businessman who will respond effectively to this situation and catch people off guard with his response as well.
Another situation that I need help with understanding. The president says what he means. I agree with you most of the time. And when he was tweeting about this Russia investigation, he clearly doesn't like it because he believes that whatever is going on is bad for him. And so he puts Jay Sekulow out there, his attorney, to argue that he is not under investigation. Why? Why take on such a small point that defies the obvious?
Well, I think there's a number of different reasons. I mean, I can give you my reasons. I can't necessarily give you the president's reasons, but I think what the president sometimes does, he's a media, you know, this is good for you, probably good for ratings. The president is watching, he's reading a lot of stuff, and he probably doesn't like a lot of the stuff that he's reading that he thinks is very unfair. We can disagree about this, but the mainstream media, in my opinion, has not been fair to the president. They weren't fair to him when he was a candidate. They're not fair to him today. I don't think he's under investigation, but I don't know the facts because I'm not the FBI. I'm not Robert Mueller. But
there's
Jay,
no reason to believe that Mueller wouldn't be looking at the situation surrounding the firing of the director of the FBI.
I understand that, but when James Comey tells the president several times that he's not under investigation.
Right, but that has nothing to do with whether Mueller would look at the firing. James Comey couldn't have told him, you're under investigation for firing me. He wasn't fired.
I understand that.
I know, but you guys keep bringing up Comey telling him he's not under investigation.
You're making great points.
All right, go ahead.
Viewers are loving
you. Make a great point.
Your viewers are loving you for the great points, but let me make a great point.
Go ahead, make your point.
Jay Sekulow is a phenomenal attorney. The president has done nothing wrong. I said that to you last week from Washington. I'll say it to you today. I can stand by that very confidently. I've known the guy for many, many years. And I think his integrity as a human being in a situation like that, I think is unquestionable.
All right, but here's what I'm saying.
But let me finish.
Well, I want to comment. I want to ask a question about your point. All right, you made your point, right?
Yeah.
You say, well, we have a problem.
Done nothing wrong, Chris.
Right.
That's my point.
And I'm saying that's fine for you to hold that opinion. There's an investigation going on. We'll see what it yields. Comey told the president he wasn't under investigation. Fine. What does that have to do with Mueller examining the circumstances surrounding the firing of Comey?
So you're saying that he's under investigation by Mueller surrounding the circumstances?
I'm saying that it makes sense that Mueller would be looking at it. Comey said as much in his testimony.
I mean, it was 30 years ago, but I did take constitutional law from Larry Tribe at Harvard Law School. The president has the right to fire the FBI director. The president also got information and a recommendation from the deputy. He did tell Lester Holt that he would have fired him anyway, and he made a decision to fire the FBI director. Now, if you want to say that he made that...
He said more than that to Lester Holt.
I understand that, but we're talking about this specific issue and
on
investigation.
On this specific issue, he said more.
But let's stay on this issue.
I am staying on it. I'm saying there's more there.
I'm right here with you, brother. Let me finish the point.
Go ahead.
I'm right here with you.
Go ahead.
Here's the point. The president said he would have fired him one way or the other. He has the right to do that. People in the media are suggesting maybe he fired him as a way to obstruct justice on the Russian situation.
Because what did the president say to Lester Holt?
What did he say, Chris?
He said, I had Russia on my mind, and I was thinking, you know, this whole Russian thing, I don't like what Comey's doing about it. I fired him.
You see, here's the thing about you that
he means what he says, right?
I genuinely like this about you, and you're very good at this. You're probably really good at crossword puzzles, too. But let's stay on this point. Okay, the president did nothing wrong. He fired the guy because he had the opportunity to fire the guy, and he didn't think he was doing the right job for him. He has the right to fire him.
He has the right to fire him.
When he said that he had Russia, when he said he had Russia on his mind, it's not because he did anything wrong. He's sitting there frustrated at the notion that
he doesn't like the Russia probe.
Because it's a hoax.
He doesn't like it. That's what he thinks.
It's more fake news.
It's certainly not a hoax.
It's fake scandal, fake investigation.
No.
Yes, it is. As
Anthony,
it relates,
you don't believe that.
Chris, I do believe that as
you
it
don't
relates
believe
to collusion.
All right, that's something
the
separate.
campaign.
That's something separate.
Well,
But
we're arguing two different things.
But you guys conflate them. Investigating
I'm
why
not
Russia
conflating
interfered
them.
and who may have helped all matters.
The
Yes?
president has been very clear about that.
Not so much.
He has.
Not so much.
He's been clear privately.
He calls it a hoax and a witch hunt. He doesn't ever say, let's find out what happened with Russia.
Calls it a hoax
James
and a
Comey says
witch
he
hunt as it
never asked
relates
him
to the
about Russia
investigation.
investigation.
As it relates to the investigation of him and his campaign and his campaign
And
staff,
James Comey says the president
thinks
talked
it's
to
a
him
bunch of
9
bunk.
times and never asked him about the Russia investigation into the election interference. What does that tell us? It tells us he doesn't care about that. He cares about what happens to him and any allegations of collusion because it hurts him politically.
Okay, so this is where I'm going to totally disagree with you on
Please.
that. And I'm going to be very respectful to you. The president does care. The president has said on more than one occasion that once all of the facts and all the findings are unveiled, that he would act in a judicious way as it related to Russia and other countries if other countries are in the problem.
And he keeps calling the process a hoax and the people who are doing it bad and conflicted.
Your issue, okay, which I respect, but you should respect my issue. My issue is...
You are here because I respect your take.
Okay, all right, so let me give you my take. The president has an agenda that's going to help the American people, lower middle-class families and middle-class families. These sorts of scandals and these hoaxiness nature to some of these scandals has got to be very frustrating to an American businessman that is now the commander-in-chief and the president. He wants to execute his agenda, Chris. He wants to bring the Congress together and get wins on the board for the American people as it relates to health care reform. Democrats know that that has to be reformed as well as the Republicans. We may disagree on the nature of the bill, but we all know that the Obamacare situation has to be reformed. Number two, we haven't reformed the tax code since 1986, Chris. That's a generation plus 6 or 7 years of no reform of the tax code. We have to fix the tax code. Number three.
We're waiting to hear what the plan is.
We're waiting to hear what the plan is, but we're so distracted by all of this
You can do two things at
nonsense.
once. You know, you can't say that the Russia situation doesn't matter. It just does,
agree,
Anthony.
but why don't we get guests on New Day to talk about health care?
We
Let's
do.
get guests
We
on
do.
New Day
We
to
have
talk
them on
about
all the
tax
time.
plan.
And by the way, a lot of you, the Republicans, won't come on to talk about it.
Oh, okay. Well, you're a tough interviewer, Chris. Maybe they don't like your suit.
Talk to
tie,
Allison.
and your hair.
Everybody likes her.
We'll have Allison talk to these people, okay?
But they can all come on. They say no.
My point. I'm going to stay
ahead,
on
finish
my
up.
point. I'm going to stay on my point. Okay. He is a great guy. He's a moral leader. I think he'll handle the North Korean situation. I think he will execute on taxes and health care. And my guess is that when this is all over and there's no there for the president, I hope people in the mainstream media will vindicate him. When they were railing on him and writing all these op-eds that he's the worst guy ever, shouldn't be the president, and he made it to the presidency, I think the New York Times had to have a little bit of an apology and a comeuppance. And my guess is that when this investigation is over, the smart people in the media, the objective, fair people in the media, will have to have a little bit of a comeuppance and say, hey, there was no there related to the president, his campaign team, and the administration. Now, there might be a there related to collusion, you know, to activity, not collusion, but activity related to the Russians. It's a totally different topic. And I do believe that he will handle that aggressively.
There's certainly
as
a
the commander-in-chief.
relationship between all the different questions being asked. Mueller should be allowed to do his job, and then we'll see what comes out of it. Anthony
Okay, great
Scaramucci,
seeing you.
always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Allison.
Anthony Scaramucci, your wish is my command. Our next guest is going to talk health care because Senate Democrats are protesting the secrecy of Republicans over their health care bill. What did their protest accomplish last night? Senator Chris Murphy, who just spoke on the Senate floor hours ago, is going to join us next. 5 months into the Trump administration, how are his strong supporters feeling? And how about his opponents? What's their plan? In our latest voter panel, we sat down with Republicans, Democrats, and an independent to take their pulse. And we start with a registered Democrat who voted for Gary Johnson for president, but who says he's come around to supporting President Trump.
My feeling is very complicated. I voted for Johnson, so I was that third-party voter. However, I have been moving towards the president. There are people who are opposing him, not necessarily on policy, but just because they just don't like him. And I don't like that. So I provide some support because I think it's important that we support the president. We're all in this together.
I guess it's just the rhetoric. It's like we're in a perpetual campaign now. And I think both parties need to take responsibility for the radicals on each side of the aisle and start to really influence the parties to make positive change for average people.
It's not just the rhetoric. It's not just his Twitter feed. It's the policies that he is enacting. It's the policies that he's pulling out of. This is daily doing damage to our country and to our future generations and to the world.
I just think that if we give him a little bit of time and we all work together, Democrats, Republicans, and we cut out the crazy, we'll be all right.
Cut out the crazy. That's a good national motto. When you hear the folks on this side or other Trump supporters say, you got to give him a chance. Hasn't been long enough. What do you say?
It shouldn't take 6 months. It shouldn't take 6 weeks. The office of presidency is not a place to cut your teeth on government.
I don't think it's in our best interest to try to focus on the areas where we disagree. I think we should try to start where we agree: infrastructure, tax reform, getting more jobs, taking care of America. Who is against that? Let's start there, and then we can kind of work from there, and maybe turn off his Twitter.
Show of hands, wish that he would stop the Twitter. Why are you half and half on stopping the Twitter?
I'll be honest, it's like watching a train wreck. But at the same time, I mean, he's telling us things that he shouldn't be telling us that are going to get him in trouble. And really, he's kind of helping speed that process, I believe, of getting him out of office just because he can't shut up.
Trump hasn't actually done anything to anybody. He's tweeted. He hasn't really passed any major legislation. So where's the travel ban right now? It's being struck down at every turn. So there are mechanisms we have in place to deal with a personality as big as Trump. And we have to just give him a chance to, and I hate to use his vernacular, but drain the swamp. We have so many people at the trough.
I don't think he's draining the swamp. He's filling the swamp with more of the same. How many people are from Goldman Sachs that he's working with? How many people is he bringing in there because they're billionaires and they're going to make money from it? I think that's part of the problem.
Every other administration has done the same thing. So he may not be draining the swamp in that aspect, but when he's trying to, shrink the size of government, I think that we should give him a chance.
Let's start bringing some jobs home by starting to make his ties here. I mean, why can't he bring his companies and Ivanka's companies here to America to create jobs? You got to lead by example. You're the leader of the free world.
I somewhat agree with that, but I do think he's made some changes that are positive fiscally. The Paris Accord. I think rattling NATO, in my mind, was a good thing. That is another deal that I consider to be a raw deal as far as America's concerned.
I mean, I think Putin's getting exactly what he wants out of all this. That you shake up NATO and then it shakes up our leadership, it shakes up our relationships, and Russia has had a clear impact globally. I mean, Putin's not stupid. I mean, I think that he's got his claws in globally, and it feels to me that the shaking up of NATO, to me, is not a good thing. I don't disagree that we're paying more than our fair share. I don't disagree with that. But I think there's a way to negotiate that. And this is the guy who says he can make the best deals ever. And I haven't seen that yet.
Well, it's back to the, give him a little time concept. I think, what he did with NATO is step one, and that's to bring everybody to the table.
I disagree. I disagree. I don't think he's bringing people to the table. I think he's alienating the United States from the rest of the world. And pulling out of the Paris Agreement was just horrible. Bad decision. We're alienating our allies even at this point. So our international diplomacy is horrible.
Well, I kind of disagree because I think he has achieved great success over the years with that posture and that approach, and I think he's using the same approach with all his negotiations. They all have to start somewhere.
But that's in business. The way that you conduct business is not the way that you run a country.
He is our president. What is it like for you as non-supporters to have to function?
I'm really struggling. I'm struggling to not stay in my little echo chamber on social media. I started a company called Rise Travel, and we do the travel and logistics to get people to and from marches and rallies and things like that. It just definitely lit a fire for me.
Michael.
I have decided that at my level that I am running for Congress. I'm going to run for the U.S. House of Representatives to represent Ohio's 10th District.
Is that right?
Yes. I plan to do what Democrats never do, which is to go out into all parts of my district, including the rural Republican parts, and give them my message and say, talk. Let's open a dialogue. I don't think that I would have even considered this had Hillary Clinton won.
Okay, last question. Hillary Clinton is sort of dancing around the edges of public stage. Is she still a leader in the Democratic Party?
I think it's past Hillary. I think we need a new vision. I think we need people who are not the common politician, and let's really create a future that is viable for all of us. All of us.
So one of the things that I heard from them, and that I've heard from a lot of voters, and I think this is interesting that this is sort of taken root, the two-party system, Republican, Democrat, is not cutting it for them anymore. They want other options. They don't want to just be put in those boxes. A lot of them said that they feel fiscally conservative but socially moderate, and they don't know where to go with those feelings. Which party for that?
I mean, you know, in truth, I've been hearing that probably since I was like 8.
Right, so maybe it's time to do something
Well,
about
third
that.
parties never get any purchase, whether it's because of the money or the dominant personalities that wind up populating the major parties. It doesn't happen.
I hear you, but it feels like there's maybe a tipping point, maybe something is changing. And if enough people say, we want to break out of this mold, then maybe something happens.
Maybe. We will see the 3 most loaded words in rational thought.
Thanks to our international viewers for watching. For you, CNN Newsroom is next. For our U.S. viewers, polls are about to open in Georgia's special election, so New Day continues right now. All eyes on Georgia today.
The intensity is high. It's a neck-and-neck race.
It's obviously a test of the Trump brand now that he is president.
Let's send someone to Washington who can really handle it.
You're asking me to pick up the phone on an investigation that right now we don't know exists.
The stonewalling that we're getting over here at the White House. I don't know what world we're living in right now.
You don't forget a $100 billion deal and leave it off your national security clearance for.
Mr. President, are you under investigation by the special counsel?
A lot of bad things happened, but at least we got him home to be with his parents.
The North Koreans cannot be allowed to seize Americans, brutalize them, and send them home in a coma to die.
The administration has to respond forcefully.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Good morning. Welcome to your New Day. The polls are now open in Georgia for the most expensive House race ever. Many say it is a referendum on the Trump presidency. Democrats are hoping for a big win in Georgia's 6th district. The implications could have big consequences for the president's agenda. Mr. Trump sees the urgency, tweeting early this morning about the high stakes in this race.
One of the biggest issues for voters there, health care. This election comes as the fight over Obamacare's future plays out in the Senate. Democrats tying up the Senate floor in protest of the secrecy they say is going on with Republicans in drafting this bill. So we have it all covered for you. Let's begin with CNN's Jason Carroll. He is live in Marietta, Georgia. What's the mood, Jason?
Well, the mood is one of so many folks here in this district are just wanting this race, Allison, to be over. But it's just too close to call at this point. Just let me sort of just give you an idea of what's been happening here in the 6 congressional districts. I mean, for years it's been reliably Republican, but Donald Trump narrowly carried it in 2016. Democrats saw an opening. Enter Jon Ossoff. He's the political novice in this race, but he got a lot of attention early on in the campaign by very much making the race about Donald Trump. You've got Karen Handel on the other side of things, who says Jon Ossoff is just another typical liberal. She's been doing all that she can to try to really tie him to a Nancy Pelosi. So here's what you've got here. You've got a race that's really seen through the prism of how Donald Trump is doing. If Ossoff wins in this particular race, that's going to be a huge symbolic boost for Democrats going forward, giving them the momentum they need going into the midterm elections. If Handel pulls out a win on this side, that's going to give GOP lawmakers a sign that, hey, perhaps what the president is doing is working. That will give them some momentum trying to push through his agenda. But once again, this race, too close to call at this point. Polls close at 7 o'clock. It's going to be a nail-biter for both sides. Chris?
All right, Jason, good to have you there. We'll check back in a little bit. It is a race against the clock, not just in Georgia, but also in the health care debate. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is supposedly pushing for a vote on a bill before the July 4th recess. Democrats are taking control of the Senate floor in protest of the GOP's secret plan. CNN's Suzanne Malveaux live on Capitol Hill with more. The irony of McConnell, who was so vocal, and rightly so, about the ACA process, even though there were all those hearings and now almost none.
Absolutely right, Chris, because look at this. I mean, while many people were sleeping late last night, you had the Democrats who were taking to the Senate floor. They were certainly wide awake, staging this protest, this talkathon, very frustrated with the super secret process now that the Republicans are engaged in here, trying to come up with their own version of repealing and replacing Obamacare. They have asked the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, look, can we have some hearings here, perhaps debate, an all-senators meeting, or even a copy of the text when there is a text of this bill. McConnell has said no to all three of those requests, and so there's very little that they can do. A couple of options, of course, to try to slow down the government process, routine process, and also simply just to make some noise.
The Republicans are writing their health care bill under the cover of darkness because they're ashamed of it.
If this bill were as wonderful as its proponents would like us to believe, it would be out in the open.
There's only one word for what the Senate Republicans are doing with this bill: shameful.
And CNN has learned that one of the things to negotiating is cuts in Medicaid, deeper cuts for the Senate version than the House bill. That, of course, satisfying a nod to conservatives, but really alienating some of the moderates. Allison.
Okay, Suzanne, thank you very much for that. Now to another important story. President Trump condemning North Korea after the death of American student Otto Warmbier after he spent 17 months in captivity. CNN's Joe Johns is live at the White House with more. What are they saying, Joe?
Allison, this Warmbier case is a mystery. It's a human tragedy, and it only adds to the crisis that is North Korea. And the administration's options may be very much limited because of concerns about other Americans that are being imprisoned in North Korea right now. Meanwhile, the Russia investigation continues to cause distractions for the White House.
It's a brutal regime, and we'll be able to handle it.
President Trump under pressure to take a harder line toward North Korea amid outrage over the death of American student Otto Warmbier. The 22-year-old was released last week from North Korean custody after spending 17 months in prison for trying to steal a propaganda poster. Warmbier arrived in the U.S. with severe brain damage and in a coma.
He spent 1.5 years in North Korea. A lot of bad things happened, but at least we got him home to be with his parents.
The president offering his deepest condolences in a statement and condemning the brutality of the North Korean regime. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson stating that the U.S. holds North Korea accountable for Warmbier's unjust imprisonment. Republican Senators John McCain and Marco Rubio taking a tougher tone, with McCain stating plainly that Warmbier was murdered by the Kim Jong-un regime. The international challenge coming as the president continues to confront the Russia investigation back at home. Two top Democrats in the House now demanding documents related to General Michael Flynn's foreign work in a letter to Flynn's lawyers, alleging that President Trump's fired national security advisor failed to disclose a 2015 Middle East trip on his security clearance forms, a trip reportedly related to a major nuclear energy deal involving Russia. Democrats also alleging he left key information about a 2015 Saudi Arabia trip off those forms. This after a key member of the Senate Judiciary Committee made this stunning statement about Flynn on Monday.
All the signals are suggesting that he's already cooperating with the FBI and may have been for some time.
That committee now agreeing to widen the scope of its Russia probe to include possible obstruction of justice.
Political interference with an ongoing investigation, regardless of what the president's lawyer may say, could make the president a target, a subject, a person of interest.
With the Russia investigation expanding, the White House continues to stonewall reporters as Sean Spicer's future as press secretary remains unclear.
The White House is refusing to answer those questions on camera. My guess is because they want their evasive answers not saved for posterity.
And new this morning, CNN's Manu Raju reporting that members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the top members, are expected to meet on Wednesday with special counsel Robert Mueller. The committee apparently has reached an agreement now on the scope of its own investigation into Russian interference in the last election, likely to probe, among other things, the president's interactions with former FBI Director Jim Comey, as well as questions of obstruction of justice. Back to you.
Okay, that'll be interesting, Joe. Thank you very much for that. So we have a lot to discuss with our panel. We want to bring in CNN political analysts Jackie Kucinich, David Gregory, and Michael Shear. So let's begin, guys, with the Georgia race. David Gregory, what is this a bellwether for? Is this a bellwether for the mood today, a snapshot, or the midterms, or President Trump's agenda, or what?
Well, I think it's all of those things. I think you want to try to measure voter intensity on both sides of the aisle, but particularly Democrats who are trying to retake Congress and who would eventually like to get the White House back. You want to get some sense of what how Trump is performing overall with the electorate, how his agenda is measuring up. So you get some measure of this at this point. We'll most likely overread one way or the other into this special election. But there's so much national money that's been poured into this, but that's what people are looking for, is this kind of early look. And on the policy front, what's going to create the intensity? It's not just going to be the Russia investigation. It's going to be health care. Democrats, I think, want to use that and use that argument in this race to say, hey, we've got something to argue very strongly when it comes to the midterms next year.
Michael Shear, there's no question that both parties recognize the urgency right here. It's so different in feel from Montana and Kansas, and certainly in terms of money. But for the Democrats, you know, they need a win, right? They need to show that they have some prospect for change. How big is it, therefore?
Look, I think that's exactly right. I think that as important as the actual results is the psychology of the two parties, right? We know that President Trump loves to portray himself as a winner. So to the extent that the Republicans can pull one out of the hat here and he wins again, he gets to go and describe him and the party as winners. For the Democrats, they're so desperate to go against type. This is a Republican district. If they can win psychologically for them, even more important than one single congressional district, which after all is probably not a harbinger of anything, really. I mean, you can't extrapolate out and say because they win this one district, that means they're going to take back Congress. But psychologically, it's really important for them.
Jackie, let's look at this interesting district, okay? And in terms of the numbers and how much it has swung. In 2012, Romney won by 23 points over President Obama. Then in 2016, Trump won by 1.5%.
Right.
Over Hillary Clinton. So it's very, very tough to predict. I mean, even if you look at, you know, all the soothsayers, Nate Silver, it's all, like, the projections are all over the map.
Except that the Republicans should win because they outnumber Democrats so greatly in that district, and they've always held it since '79.
If math works, Republicans should win.
Well, that is true, but the other number in there is 35. That is not in there is 35%, and that's the president's approval rating in that district. Patricia Murphy has been on the ground for the Daily Beast, and one of the things that she's written about and she's been hearing is that Karen Handel can't get out from under the Trump approval ratings, and her fortunes have sort of risen and fallen with his, which is why she's been trying to localize this race. They both have, but particularly Handel needs this race to be a local race, which is why she was with Sonny Perdue and Tom Price in these final rallies, these final moments going up to this race. So the fact that this will also be a test for Trump. And while Michael's absolutely right, you can't really extrapolate 2018 based on one district. This is the type of district that Democrats do need to win. Wealthy, well-educated, they need to flip these districts in order to take back the House in 2018. So there is a lot at stake here, and they're looking to see if Democrats do win, they're going to be looking to take this playbook and see if they can bring it to other parts of the country.
And David Gregory, Ossoff, certainly, you know, he's a newbie here, Handel less so, but they do both feel like proxies for something bigger within their own parties. Right. And it does seem to be centered, if not a referendum on Trump, certainly what's going on with health care is going to matter in that district. And what do you make of that process right now and how it plays?
Well, the process is playing certainly toward both bases, right? Because as we've talked before this morning, this is such a major promise to conservatives around the country that they would repeal and replace Obamacare. So they've got to be able to deliver on that. And Democrats are trying to preserve Obamacare, warts and all, to say that at least coverage is important and that you don't want to take people off of coverage even if you want to improve the system. So that's going to become a big, intense issue for the future of the Democratic Party, which is preserving a big entitlement like this that helps people stay healthy, helps them get access to insurance. That's something that whatever form the Democratic Party takes, they're going to use as a central issue.
So, Michael, if there is a vote on this, whatever the Senate is doing behind closed doors, if there is a vote on this next week, how's it going to go?
How's the actual vote going to go?
What's going to be the outcome of this? Since some in the Senate say they don't even know, obviously Democrats say they don't even know what's in it.
Right. Look, I think the outcome of the health care vote is as uncertain today as the outcome of this 6th district race because the Senate doesn't have, the Senate Republicans don't have a lot of margin. They can only lose a couple of votes. And remember this, that even if Mitch McConnell were able to get this passed, whatever this is, we don't know what it is yet, but if he gets it passed, there's a long road ahead for reconciling whatever the Senate might pass with what the House passed. And so we're not at the end of the process. We're still very much in the middle of the process. And I think if there is a vote, whatever the outcome is very much uncertain at this moment.
So, Jackie, there is one thing to call out here, though. While it is true, and we all remember from covering the ACA, that Nancy Pelosi saying we got to pass it, then they can read it. You know, how all the Republicans were rightly upset by that. They're doing the same thing right now. And then some, because with the ACA,
in Washington?
But still,
shocked.
Even with that baseline, right? We don't expect much better, sadly. But they had so many hearings. There was so much out there in interplay and debate with the ACA. There is none with this. They are intentionally keeping it quiet by all expectations, even within their own party. I'm sure the same thing for you as it is for me. How many Republicans have said to you, yeah, you know, I don't really know. I can't really figure it out. You know, House Republicans were like, yeah, they're not really talking to us. They're not really letting us know what's going on. I mean, you know, it's so obvious that they're really trying to hide the ball here.
It's true, but it's not without reason, and I'm not excusing it. But look what happened in the House process. When the White House got involved, when all these other people got involved, it became a huge mess. And I'm not saying this won't end up being a mess. It might end up being a disaster. But that said, at least in the nuts and bolts when they were putting it together, you remember the president would come out and say, hey, we have a deal, and would be talking about various things that are in this bill, and it would explode, and then the whole thing would fall apart. So they've sort of watched this House process, and Mitch McConnell doesn't want to see that happen, which is why one of the reasons this is really kept under wraps. And, you know, and to their credit, not a lot has leaked out yet. That said, you know, but as you mentioned, the hypocrisy here is definitely rich.
David, we have to talk about Otto Warmbier. What a heartbreaking, sickening story and outcome. What can President Trump do if John McCain his classification is right and this was the murder of a U.S. citizen? What can President Trump do?
This is a very hard story to follow and to have to watch. I mean, the murder of an American citizen by this, what the president accurately and aptly calls a brutal regime. So the question is, where's the leverage? You know, the problem with some kind of military step, even if it were more limited to send a message or to be punitive, is the potential for an unhinged regime in North Korea to so quickly escalate when we have tens of thousands of troops in South Korea. The other play, of course, is the influence of China and whether the United States in talks with China can get them to apply more pressure. We haven't seen a lot of that done successfully thus far, which makes this a very tricky situation and very tricky to come out and say, oh, well, the United States has to do something. The administration, I think appropriately so, is playing this very closely and carefully at the moment.
Right. I mean, you know, just so that we're all clear, though, usually in these situations, it's about detention, refusal to release. If this is judged as a homicide, which means this was human action that caused this young man's death, you have a different scenario on its hands, and we'll have to see if the government talks about it in those terms.
All right, panel, thank you very much. We should let everyone know that coming up, On New Day in our next hour, we will be speaking with the Democratic candidate in the Georgia special election, Jon Ossoff. And of course, we did invite his Republican challenger, Karen Handel. She declined for today.
No cameras, no audio, and very few answers. All right, so President Trump has yet to condemn Monday's terror attack against Muslims outside a London mosque. He hasn't even expressed sympathy for our ally in Britain yet. Why? What does that mean in terms of this window into what the president does and does not respond to? Let's discuss with senior editor of The Atlantic, David Frum, and CNN political commentator, Jason Miller. He is, of course, the former senior communications advisor for the Trump campaign. Gentlemen, good to have you both. David Frum, what do you see in this?
Well, one of the dangers of a president tweeting in this way in his own voice is he becomes responsible not only for everything he says, but for everything he does not say. And in a universe of grief and woe, that he creates this imprint. You can see from his tweets, and I'm sure foreign intelligence agencies are studying them, his rages, his fears, his moods. They know at what time of the day he gets up and down. And you can see his attitudes, his real attitudes toward friends and causes. As you note, he gets a lot less exercised about the deaths of Muslims than he does about the deaths of non-Muslims, a lot less exercised by crimes against Muslims than by crimes by Muslims.
This is not the first time, Jason, that the president hasn't immediately responded to an attack on Muslims. We saw one a few months ago, and it's a fair argument to say, well, he doesn't comment on everything, but the White House has made it pretty clear, as has the president, his tweets matter. They are to be seen as official statements of the president. So why isn't he out in front of what happened in London?
Well, Chris, I do find it a little bit ironic that for so much of the coverage recently has been on the president tweeting too much. Now there's criticism that he's not tweeting enough, or he's not tweeting.
Not from me, Jason. He can't tweet enough for me. So on this show, it's a different context.
Well, Chris, I said much of the coverage lately, and that goes for all members of the media across the board, as far as what we've seen. But look, I think one of the things we got to keep in mind is this attack just happened yesterday, and I think some of the criticism that came of after the president after the most recent London attacks was that he was out there too soon, that he was out there commenting before all the information is in. Now, what we don't know is what additional things the president or the White House might have lined up today, and I do think we have to point out that the president did weigh in very strongly yesterday with regard to the 7 sailors who were killed in the ship collision, as well as the tragic killing of Otto Warmbier, which, by the way, Chris, I have to commend you and this network for putting so much time behind that story this morning. I quite frankly found it rather shameful that some of the major dailies today had the Otto Warmbier killing reduced to basically a postage stamp on their front pages. So good for you for going and doing that. But look, I think it's so soon. I mean, this attack just happened yesterday that might simply be the president's waiting to get more information, and that might be something we hear from shortly.
But we haven't seen that, David. We haven't seen that reserve when it's not Muslims and other things that the president seems to care more about.
Well, the president also very visibly internalizes what other people think about him. How people feel about him is the most important element of psychology. And unquestionably, he has rendered himself utterly toxic in the United Kingdom. His behavior after the London Bridge killings is, British observers say, an important factor in the loss of Theresa May's majority and in nearly bringing to power a Labour government, probably a Labour government fairly soon, and under quite an anti-American leader. And all of this is super relevant, because right now the Trump administration is driving, without much of a plan, toward confrontations in Syria and in Northeast Asia, and is doing so without allies, and very likely in a situation where even the British are going to be difficult to bring along, because the president has made himself, and therefore the United States, so toxic in the British political environment.
So even if you wanted to wait for more information, Jason, what would be wrong about getting out in front of just wishing the best to your ally, Britain?
Well, and again, that's we don't know. I mean, we don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what's coming in from intelligence reports. We don't know.
There can't be any reason not to express condolences to the British, right? What could you find out that would make that inappropriate?
And Chris, and there very well might be the possibility that that's something that's going to happen today. But I think the president had his focus clearly on the Americans who were killed yesterday, and that's where he was keeping most of his attention. And I think, look, this attack literally, Chris, just happened yesterday. I think it's to go and say that the president hasn't done it yet, and therefore he's not going to, or that he's ignoring it. I don't think we can make that assumption.
Well, by definition, if you haven't said anything about something, you are ignoring ignoring it. And when you talk about North Korea, yes, the president did comment on it, but it was a very different type of measured comment than the muscularity he had suggested he would use with North Korea, certainly far more passive than he was about Cuba. He gave a speech that was some 50-odd minutes long, strong in what he wanted there. Cuba, with North Korea, much more measured, even though we have a potential homicide of an American at North Korean hands. Why?
Well, the important thing, and I think some of this you touched on in your previous segment, but what we also don't know is what other conversations are happening and what the administration is trying to do with bringing home additional American prisoners. Again, big credit to the administration for getting Otto Warmbier home. I wish we could have got him back in better shape and that he was still alive and still with us. I think this killing is just absolutely terrible. But many of our options might be limited when it comes to North Korea.
Also worth noting that since the intervention at Camp David, when the president was isolated and prevented from tweeting about Robert Mueller anymore, he has been more restrained on Twitter. Something happened at Camp David. Maybe they gave him a third scoop of ice cream, but since then, he's been on best behavior.
Jason Miller, unless you know anything about the third scoop, we'll leave it for another time. Mr. Frum, Mr. Miller, thank you both. Allison.
That is persuasive, as I can attest. Thank you, gentlemen. So a college star about to achieve his basketball. An anti-terror investigation underway in Paris after a driver deliberately rammed a car into a police van on the Champs-Élysées. French officials say the man was on a radicalization watch list and that explosives and weapons were found in his car. The driver was pulled from the car after it burst into flames. He later died. Meanwhile, the man suspected of plowing his van into a crowd of worshippers near a mosque in North London is identified as Darren Osborne, a father of 4. He was subdued by bystanders and taken into custody at the scene.
The Supreme Court agreeing to hear a landmark gerrymandering case that could change the way U.S. elections are conducted. The justices are going to be asked to decide whether Republicans in Wisconsin violated the Constitution by how they reconfigured the state electoral maps back in 2011. The allegation is that they did so to reduce the impact of minority voters. The case is going to be heard once the court's October session convenes.
Dramatic video out of New Mexico, a deadly multi-vehicle crash on Interstate 10. This is near the border of Arizona. Authorities say high winds kicked up and created a dust storm that led to this. Several people killed, many others seriously hurt. My goodness.
Why has President Trump not tweeted or commented on the London terror attack that killed and injured Muslims? We discuss the choices of what the president decides to comment on next.
Because of the vulnerability of U.S. troops that are in South Korea, are there smaller steps that you can take militarily without it escalating? And I think that's what's so difficult with an unhinged regime like this that is testing advanced weaponry the way they are, is that you could very quickly get to a major scale conflict that nobody wants, which is why the Chinese are so important. Will fear of that kind of escalation persuade the Chinese to do something, knowing that the U.S. can't be in a position where we have one of our citizens murdered like this after being detained and tortured and stand idly by?
Hey, Maggie, let's quickly touch on the latest thread in the Russia investigation. There's a new wrinkle that Democratic Senator Whitehouse seems to be floating, and that is that he believes that Michael Flynn is cooperating. He's reading the tea leaves, he says, so he's speculating, but he sees signs that Michael Flynn may already be offering up information to investigators.
Look, unless the senator has information that the rest of us are not privy to by way of this Senate investigation, and it's possible that he does, it's really hard to tell from the outside whether somebody is cooperating with the FBI. There's often a lot of speculation about what someone is doing, whether it is Michael Flynn or somebody else in another case. I think it is impossible to know, but that having been said, it is been widely speculated on, well beyond the senator, that Michael Flynn is either, has or will cut some kind of a deal with the FBI, and his attorneys have been pretty clear that he is looking for an immunity deal. There has also been a belief within the White House that a lot of what you see about President Trump, signaling to Michael Flynn through anonymously sourced stories, stay strong. He has indeed said to people he wished he hadn't fired Flynn. A lot of that, I think, is about concern about, Flynn sort of working in tandem with the FBI and what that could mean.
Quickly, John Kirby, the idea that Flynn didn't just fail to disclose some of his Russia activities and some of his other consulting, but that specific to the Middle East. What do you see there as a sensitivity?
Well, I mean, obviously there's, there are lots of security contracts, defense relationships that we have with countries there. I don't know what his dealings would be, but it could be, in that realm. I mean, in terms of, his consulting work. More critically, Chris, I think what this shows me is a pattern of behavior here of non-disclosure of foreign contacts, and it's not just by General Flynn. So I think, this just builds on this narrative that there was a lot of foreign activity going on during the transition that wasn't being transparent.
Insight. Story we need to tell you about: the Supreme Court agreeing to hear a case that could fundamentally change the way America conducts its election.